Welcome back to our news bulletin. The United Kingdom has overtaken Italy to report the highest official COVID-19 death toll in Europe. According to official statistics, the number of fatalities in the country has risen to over 32,000. With nearly 69,000 victims, only the United States has suffered more confirmed fatalities from the virus than Britain. Italy has the second highest death toll in Europe with more than 29,000 fatalities, followed by Spain with over 25,000 deaths. France is the third worst hit country in Europe. Elsewhere, Iran recorded 63 deaths in a day, pushing the country's overall total to more than 6,300. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 252,000 lives, with nearly 3.6 million people infected. However, parts of Europe, Asia, and the United States have begun to lift restrictions to try to inject life into economies crippled by weeks of closures due to COVID-19. The EU will put forward a proposal at the World Health Assembly's 18th May meeting asking for an independent probe into the origins of the coronavirus. In a statement, spokeswoman Virginie Betty-Henriksen said the bloc is consulting with the WHO members on the proposal's draft. She said a thorough understanding of the epidemiology of COVID-19 is essential for public authorities to make informed decisions. The official said that the proposed stresses the importance of a multilateral response with global solidarity and coordination. The ties between the US and China deteriorated dramatically since Trump's branding COVID-19 as the Chinese virus. Both countries have blamed each other for the pandemic. In Pakistan, death toll from COVID-19 has risen by 24 to 486. The Health Ministry reported 1,315 infection cases in the last 24 hours, bringing the total to 21,501. It said over 5,700 patients have recovered so far, while 186 remain critical. The ministry said more than 222,000 tests have been conducted countrywide, with nearly 10,000 since yesterday. Meanwhile, 193 Pakistani citizens, including women and children, have been repatriated from India via the Wagah border crossing. Authorities in Lahore have screened and transferred them to quarantine centers. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has urged the world to reject India's demonization of Muslims in the context of the coronavirus outbreak. Speaking to his Omani counterpart over the phone, Qureshi said Kashmiris are being denied access to medical supplies as the virus spreads in the occupied valley. The Indian government has repeatedly scapegoated Indian Muslims as COVID-19 spreaders. At one point, it even termed them human bombs of the virus. Foreign Minister Qureshi also reiterated the need for close cooperation to mitigate the impact of the economic slowdown. Qureshi underscores the importance of Prime Minister Imran Khan's call for global initiative for debt relief for developing countries. The Omani Foreign Minister extended his government support to Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan's initiative of debt relief for poor countries. Pakistan has summoned a senior Indian diplomat to protest the continued aggression and ceasefire violations by India along the line of control. In a statement, the Foreign Office said 6 civilians were wounded in Indian forces firing in Baksar sector yesterday. The Foreign Office said 3 women and 1 child were among the wounded in Azad Kashmir. It said senseless actions by Indian forces violate the 2003 ceasefire deal and international humanitarian law. It said Indian forces along the LOC and the working boundary have been targeting civilian areas. The office said India is trying to divert world's attention from its ongoing atrocities in occupied Kashmir. The office said India has so far committed 957 ceasefire violations in the current year. In occupied Kashmir, the crippling lockdown imposed by the fascist Indian government has completed 9 months. In August last year, the BJP government in India abrogated Article 370 of its own constitution, revoking the valley's status as a disputed territory. Since then, Indian troops have martyred dozens of Kashmiris, including women and children. Meanwhile, photographs by 3 journalists showing Indian atrocities in occupied Kashmir have won the prestigious Pulitzer Prize. Talking to the media, the photographer said sometimes they had to hide their cameras in strangers' homes or vegetable bags. During a hearing in Supreme Court, the Indian government has opposed the restoration of high-speed internet in occupied Kashmir. The top court is hearing petitions challenging the communications blackout to tackle COVID-19 pandemic in the valley. In its reply, New Delhi claimed high-speed internet can be used for sharing information about forces in the valley. The government also claimed internet will be used to spread militancy and propaganda. It said matters of state policy should not be interfered with and must be left to the government. Meanwhile, the petitioners argued doctors and hospitals need online communication to fight the deadly virus. The occupied valley is reeling under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 274 days. Afghan National Security Council spokesperson Javed Faisal says government has released 102 more Taliban prisoners. The spokesperson said a total of over 850 inmates have been freed by Kabul so far. In a statement, Faisal said more prisoners can be released by Kabul administration upon the start of talks. He said Taliban should resume release of Afghan forces personnel from the list the government has shared. Earlier, Taliban released 100 security personnel and officials of Afghan military. The group said it wants the prisoner release under the Doha deal to be expedited to save them from COVID-19. The presidential palace of Afghanistan has reported progress in talks to end political turmoil in the country. The conflict between President Ashraf Ghani and rival Abdullah Abdullah has pushed Afghanistan into uncertainty since earlier this year. In a statement, a presidential palace spokesperson said the talks were underway between the two sides. The spokesperson did not provide any further details. Earlier this week, Abdullah said efforts by national personalities to resolve the political crisis have borne fruit. The former chief executive said agreements in principle have been reached. He also said work is underway on details to finalize the agreement. Syria says it has thwarted an Israeli missile attack on a research center and a military base in the northern province of Aleppo. In a statement, the army said it is assessing the damage caused by the strikes on military barracks in Al-Safira. This was Israel's fifth attack on Syrian territory in 2 weeks. On last Thursday, Israeli helicopters fired several missiles from the occupied Golan Heights on targets in southern Syria. Last month, the Israeli Defense Minister Naftali Bennett said Tel Aviv will step up its campaign against Iran in Syria. Turkey says it has killed 3 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in northern Syria. The Defense Ministry says the fighters were killed during Operation Peace Spring. It also said Turkish and Russian forces conducted the 8th patrol on a key highway in Syria's northwestern border. It said the troops from the two countries carried out land and aerial inspections in Idlib. Human Rights Watch says ISIS used the Al-Hotha Gorge in northwest Syria as a mass grave for people the group abducted and executed. In a statement, the rights body has urged authorities to preserve evidence from the site needed to prosecute the terrorist outfit. ISIS controlled the area around the Al-Hotha Gorge from 2013 to 2015. Human Rights Watch found evidence of the terrorist group's crimes by flying a drone into the 50-meter deep ravine. It says the bodies of at least 6 victims are present at the site. The group adds, based on the state of decomposition, the cadavers were dumped there long after the group had left the area. Iraq's parliament will cast their ballots in a confidence vote for the cabinet and premiership of Prime Minister-designate Mustafa al-Kadhimi. In a statement, the parliamentary office said Speaker Mohammad al-Halbusi will hold the voting session. Last month, President Barham Saleh tasked al-Kadhimi with forming a new government. The Speaker, al-Halbusi, said the cabinet will consist of 12 ministers from the Muslim Shia sect, 6 from the Sunnis, and 3 from the Kurds. Iraq has been roiled by mass protests since October last year over poor living conditions and corruption. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has threatened the Supreme Court not to interfere in his efforts to build a coalition government. Speaking to reporters in Jerusalem, Netanyahu said a decision against him may lead the country towards the fourth elections in over a year. Netanyahu made his comments shortly after the court heard a second day of arguments in a series of legal challenges to the coalition deal. Netanyahu and his former political rival Benny Gantz joined forces to form a unity government. The top court is looking into whether Netanyahu can form a new government amid criminal corruption charges and whether his coalition deal with Gantz violated the law. We're taking a short break, but stay tuned for more news. Welcome back. Russia says it is tracing a group of US and British vessels which have entered the Barents Sea. In a statement, the Defense Ministry said the Northern Fleet's assets have begun tracking NATO's Surface Action Group. Earlier, the US Navy said 4 of its ships and a Royal Navy vessel had entered the Barents Sea to conduct maritime security operations. The US Navy said the Russian Defense Ministry had been notified on May 1st in an effort to avoid misperception. American Navy surface ships had not operated in the Barents Sea since the mid-1980s. Russia's Northern Fleet is based near Murmansk in the waters of the Kola Bay, a fjord which feeds into the Barents Sea. The fleet includes both nuclear-powered ships and submarines. Berlin says the U.S. nuclear umbrella extending into Germany remains part of its adherence to NATO deterrence. Spokesman Stefan Seiber said Berlin will continue to make appropriate contribution to the bloc. Seiber said Berlin, like NATO, envisaged a world without nuclear weapons, but in the meantime adhered to NATO's nuclear deterrence concept anchored in the Merkel coalition's 2018 agreement. His statement comes after the parliamentary leader of Germany's ruling Social Democratic Party called for the removal of U.S. nuclear weapons deployed in the country. Rolf Matanze said President Donald Trump's administration sees atomic weapons not as deterrence but as weapons of aggression. U.S. President Donald Trump says the Venezuela situation has nothing to do with Washington. President Trump was referring to arrest of 2 U.S. citizens by Caracas. Footage posted on Maduro's official Twitter account shows several unidentifiable men in a boat with their hands in the air and a helicopter overhead. On Monday, Venezuela detained 2 U.S. citizens working with an American military veteran who claimed responsibility for a failed armed incursion in Caracas. In a televised speech, President Nicolas Maduro said the plot was coordinated with Washington to enter Venezuela via the Caribbean coast and oust him. Maduro said authorities have arrested 13 terrorists allegedly involved in the incursion. Meanwhile, Juan Guaido, the opposition leader who is recognized by the U.S. as interim president, has denied any involvement in the incident. President Hassan Rouhani says U.S. anti-human rights measures have hampered Iran's fight against coronavirus. Virtually addressing an online movement meeting, Rouhani said U.S. illegal sanctions have prevented Iran from getting medical equipment. The president said U.S. defunding of the World Health Organization is a strategic mistake which undermines fight against COVID-19. Rouhani said the U.S. has repeatedly violated international laws and its actions threaten multilateralism. Meanwhile, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Pankins has criticized the U.S. for blocking International Monetary Fund's aid for Iran. He said IMF must take a transparent and non-discriminatory approach in granting loans to needy and vulnerable amid the pandemic. The EU says world leaders have pledged over $8 billion to research, manufacture, and distribute a vaccine for COVID-19. Some 40 countries and donors took part in an online summit hosted by the European Union, but the United States refused to contribute to the global effort. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the money will help kickstart unprecedented global cooperation. She said it showed the true value of unity and humanity, but warned much more will be needed in the days ahead. In total, more than 30 countries, along with the UN, philanthropic bodies, and research institutes made donations.
Defining moment for the global community. At a time when we are sitting further apart than usual, the world has shown it is standing closer together than ever before. And in the space of just a few hours, we have collectively pledged 7.4 billion euros for vaccines, diagnostics and treatments.
Meanwhile, Italian scientists have claimed the world's first coronavirus vaccine breakthrough. Researchers say the vaccine has antibodies generated in mice that work on human cells. Moving on, the ongoing flooding in Kenya has claimed 164 lives. Government says heavy downpours during the rainy season have wreaked havoc all across the nation. Officials said flash floods, landslides and sinkholes have left thousands displaced, livestock dead and destroyed crops. They said this year's floods are the worst that Kenya has witnessed in years. Authorities have urged residents to move to higher ground and allow the construction of proposed dams and dikes as a long-term solution. New Zealand and Australia have agreed to ease travel restrictions between the two countries as soon as it is safe to do so. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said relaxing travel restrictions at an appropriate time will clearly benefit both countries. Addressing a news briefing in Auckland, Ardern said there is a need to be cautious as neither country wants to see the virus rebound. Ardern also attended Australia's National Cabinet meeting through video conferencing. The leaders of both countries agreed to start working on a trans-Tasman COVID-safe travel zone. However, no time frame has been announced for the opening of the borders. Meanwhile, the U.S. state of California moves towards reopening after reports suggested that the novel coronavirus is stabilizing in the state. We're taking a short break, but stay tuned for more news. Wall Street stocks have jumped as investors pinned hopes on the U.S. economy to restart. Markets traded high after a recovery in oil prices lifted the battered energy stocks and the buy news of ease in lockdowns by some countries. A nearly 4% surge in energy stocks helped bolster the S&P 500 index. The shares of Microsoft Corporation, Amazon and Apple rose for a second day. Nasdaq Composite traded nearly 2% higher, while Dow Jones Industrial Average also soared above 1%. Oil prices surged over optimism around ongoing production cuts and a recovery in demand. Major Gulf markets are trading higher as energy stocks take a rise in oil prices. Investor confidence is building over hopes that fuel demand will begin to pick up as many countries lift restrictions. International benchmark Brent crude price has jumped more than 8% to over $29 a barrel, up for a sixth straight day. Saudi benchmark index THWARTED has gained 2% as oil giant Saudi Aramco jumped 2%. Abu Dhabi index ADI is trading over 1% higher, led by an over 2% rise in stocks of UAE's largest lender, First Abu Dhabi Bank. Qatar's index QSI has gained almost 1.5% as most stocks are trading in positive territory. Dubai benchmark DFMGI rose over 1%, riding the gains made by Emaar Properties and Dubai Islamic Bank. British airline Virgin Atlantic has announced to cut 3,150 jobs. Chief Executive Shai Weiss said the airline moved its London Gatwick operations to Heathrow Airport as it counts the cost of the COVID-19 pandemic. The spread of the coronavirus has brought airports around the globe to a standstill, leaving airlines taking drastic steps to make savings. Weiss said the airline has weathered many storms since its first flight 36 years ago, but none has been as devastating as COVID-19. Last week, British Airways also said that it could cut as many as 12,000 jobs, over a quarter of its total. Meanwhile, British media reports say the government is considering cutting the proportion of workers' wages it pays Under the COVID-19 furlough scheme, the initiative now supports the wages of 6.3 million employees, almost a quarter of Britain's private sector workforce. The US has announced to borrow a record $3 trillion in the second quarter of 2020. The sum is over 5 times the previous quarterly record set at the height of the 2008 financial crisis. In a statement, the Treasury Department said the increase in privately held net marketable borrowing is due to the impact of the COVID-19. The department said it expects the government to borrow another $677 billion in the third quarter. U.S. government's total debt is now nearly $25 trillion, reaching over 100% of GDP. Washington has approved about $3 trillion in virus-related relief, estimated to be worth about 14% of the country's economy. New car sales in the UK have slumped by 97% in April from the same month last year due to coronavirus lockdown. Figures from the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders show only 4,321 cars were registered, the lowest monthly level since 1946. The closure of car dealerships as part of measures to try to combat the disease has hit consumer registrations. SMMT has downgraded full-year forecast to nearly 1.68 million sales. Chief Executive Mike House said, "The market's worst performance in living memory is hardly surprising." House said safely restarting this critical sector will be key to unlocking manufacturing and accelerating the UK's economic regeneration. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.